Welcome to today's webinar. This one is on IP budgeting. My name is Bradley. I'm the Education Program Manager at New Ventures BC. Very excited to have you here. Just a couple housekeeping notes before we kick off. Just please make sure you're muted unless you're called upon. If you have any questions, I highly encourage you to use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. We appreciate this just to help stay organized. If you feel comfortable doing so, I also invite you to turn your camera on. Just helps us feel more engaged with our audience. So if we're seeing a lot of confused faces, we know we have to go back and explain something again. But again, yeah, if you feel like it, please feel free to do so. Today, we're joined by our speaker, Susan Tees. So Susan is the IP director at New Ventures BC. She'll be talking about IP budgeting, like I said. She's a veteran Class 1 patent agent with experience in the Canadian and U.S. patent law and practice. She has over 30 years of experience, including the preparation and filing of approximately 100 submissions to the U.S. and Canadian patent offices or through foreign associates. Her experience includes sectors such as drug manufacturing, mobile phone applications, DNA constructs, and personal health appliances. I'll hand it over to Susan to get us started. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thank you very much, Bradley. Truly, he is the edu king of for us. Let me just get my sharing working. Sorry, it's a matter of pop-up windows. Let's start from the current slide. So, welcome everybody. I'm glad to see you. Some of you have taken IP pathways from me in the past, um, and hopefully enjoyed it a little bit. This is a kind of an enrichment. This is I think under the Accelerate IP program, but budgeting and IP costs are a constant question, and not surprising. It's generally a big ticket item. So today we're going to go through a few things I think are really important when I've been tasked with, okay, Susan, come up with a budget for the next 3 years. So it's important. It saves a lot of the bad experiences in the future if you do plan it. You want before you start, the most important thing is what are your business goals? If you have business goals established, which is always the first step when you're planning any kind of budget, then you can take from that and go to, okay, well, this is what I need to do from an IP point of view to support those business goals. So how do you create a good budget? I go over some tips for that. Um, some of my learned experience for assuring success in the long run, working with larger companies and multiple players. Uh, the software option is less exciting than it sounds. I think I just have an Excel suggestion for you, but there are definitely other uh, Google Sheets and other more complex software you can use. And then sustaining your peace of mind, which is basically how do you keep this going in your company as the months go by um, to make it work. So why it matters, uh, managing cash flow and predicting your profits. You want to have an idea of what your spend is, and very often in the smaller companies that I've joined, the executive are sort of just paying the bills as they come in, and they find out at the end of the year how much it costs without a lot of reflection on where are we in terms of what our budget is. Um, it's much better to have an idea of how much things are costing. Comparing your spend levels with industry norms is probably less important when you're really small and when you're really new and when you're just starting out, but they can be very important as your company is scaling up and becoming big, and there's lots of innovation, and you need to draw the line somewhere in most cases about how much you're going to register and what you're going to spend on IP and how to figure out how to do that. But that's a little bit outside budgeting. You can see when your peak spending months are, particularly with patents, there are often annuities due. You might have two or three big families, and there's like peaks of expense at those annuity times in July and September and January, for example. So it helps you to know that's coming so that you can prepare your cash flow accordingly. IP budgets help you improve decision making around, okay, well, I'm over budget already. Maybe I shouldn't file this design that I was kind of thinking would be nice. And it also helps you prepare for emergencies because you can budget for um, the event. What sometimes happens is you will have there will be a surprise, there will be surprise filing by another party, you will have a surprise innovation that you want to protect and it's not in your original budget, or you may have a letter coming from a competitor announcing that they think that you're infringing their patent. It's nice to have money put aside to afford to pay for the services around those sorts of responses. So clarifying what you want to do, it sounds easy, it's not. Um, it's usually it's like a snake eating its tail a little bit. Well, I might want to do this and I might want to do that. Well, it depends how much money I have. Well, I can't get the money until I present the board or an investment uh, uh, team with a budget. So you have to be quite it's quite a good discipline to think carefully about what do I need for my business. And I know I sound like an old record, but uh, you don't want to file a bunch of patents like we used to do in the late 80s and early 90s, where you just sort of file, yeah, well, I've got 10 patents. How do you like me now? That's not doesn't work anymore. Investors are interested in IP strategies that match the business and that make sense in terms of how much of an increase in your commercial advantage they're going to provide for your business. So if filing 10 patents doesn't help your business, it's not a good investment. Whereas if filing 20 patents is what's going to make your business successful, that may be a good investment. Something that happens very often as companies grow is there's more than one person who might be at the executive level, and having a thought out process for who is approving the costs is really important. It shouldn't just be ad hoc. What larger companies will do is they'll generally have a sign off ladder for certain amounts of money. It has to go up to a certain level. And that is actually helpful because for smaller amounts, it may not matter so much. All of these signatures should occur with reference to a budget. Often doesn't happen in smaller companies, but as the companies get bigger, uh, that's an important thing because it tends to be a little more serious of a matter if you go over budget. Um, so who's sitting there looking at the invoices? Someone should be. It could be an executive, it could be an administrator as your company gets bigger. It could be your internal patent team, which might be an administrator or an apt technician or scientist who is interested in patents. But someone is looking over that and making sure this is our file. It's not somebody else's invoice, and it matches what we asked them to do, or what they suggested it would cost. And the signature in an ideal situation, I would like to see a signature both by the hands-on manager of the patents portfolio as well as the executive who's owns the budget. It depends on the size of your company, how that works, and how your company is organized. Um, it's nice to be able to track year-to-date spending with your year-to-date budget. I used to like it when our company got bigger. The last place I was at, we had a team of accountants who could give me, this is where you're at. And I could compare that to the budget and say, no, we're going to push something off, or we're going to not do that at all this year. We're going to have to plan that for next year. So it allows you that kind of intelligence in your IP planning that saves you from those awful reporting to the board you're $100,000 over on the IP budget because you weren't very well organized or you weren't paying attention. So another thing that I've noticed in the companies I've worked with is there's often a disparity of where certain types of IP are managed. Domain names, often with IT, sometimes with legal. There's no wrong or right answer as long as it's all coordinated with the people who are managing the trademarks in particular, because domain names and trademarks often have to go together. Um, it is nicest as a patent administrator or an IP administrator working in bigger companies. It's really nice to have all of those in one place so that you can have a coordinated response. So, for example, often happens, you're in a diligence situation and somebody wants all of those, the list of all of those things, the all of the licenses, all of the trademarks, all of the domain names, and all of the patents, if I haven't already said that. And generally, you're going to have four different types of lists. IT didn't think they had to keep track of it or something. And, it can be all over the place. So it's really good to have that centralized. It makes your diligence process so much more relaxed and calm. And it gives the outside counsel who are reviewing your materials that sense of, yeah, this company knows what it's doing. So as you approach the uncertain pleasure of preparing an IP budget, what should you get together? Historical spend data is really helpful, surprisingly helpful. It doesn't even make logical sense to me that you can. Well, I do have an explanation for it. So you may find yourself spending a fairly consistent amount over the first few years, and then the next few years, it does increase generally as your portfolio goes up, but it also can even out. So what are the factors at play? One of them is if you have one patent or IP professional helping you at a firm, it's likely they have a container around how much time they can spend. And therefore, no matter how much work you throw at them, and it tends to get a little bit compressed to a certain point until they decide, oh, we need more than one uh, service provider here. So looking at the prior year data is really helpful. You can, what I generally do if I'm in a hurry or I'm not going to get enough data from the client is I will take that prior year data and I will add, say, some reasonable 10% or 20%, depending on how fast they're growing, and say that's probably what you'll be spending. And I look at it more closely than that, but that's generally you're going to get pretty close to where you're going with that kind of approach. In a more granular approach, which is recommended, accountants and finance CFOs love this. They want to know, okay, well, which patent is going to cost what and when. I would do an Excel sheet with each of the IP registrations, trademarks, domain names, license agreements, and any other IP that we might have, and put it on there. Say I'd have to guess how many patents or new inventions we would come up with during a period of time. I would provide for that. So you have it all down. It generally turns into a huge number that there's no way anyone is going to approve for you. But at least it gives you a starting point. You can shave it down and say, okay, we're not actually going to do 10 patents next year, and make it into something affordable. Again, there's this magical containment that seems to occur when you're working with a law firm. The numbers are quite big, but they don't, after a certain point, they sort of don't get bigger, because there's only so much work that can be done in a given period of time. Um, Product release schedules are very helpful. And again, as companies are small, it's often what happens, it's like a neighborhood or a city that's not planned. You get a product group, and then there's the patent group or the legal group, and then there's the executive. And as everything's growing and happening so fast, no one talks to each other. But knowing when the product release schedules are is really helpful for planning because you know when you're going to have to do freedom to operate searches, trademark clearance searches, new domain registrations, which are small potatoes, but still you kind of want to know that that's coming so you can plan for it in your schedule. So that kind of communication in between the product people, and the patent people or the legal people is really good to start building early. Similarly, executives. Now, so many problems with executive. I've never been an executive, so it's not really fair for me to point fingers, but they're out there in the world. They're facing difficult questions from would-be investors, and they want to tell them about the newest thing that's happened just yesterday in the lab. It's important for them to know, that might not be a good idea from a patent point of view. Now, this is a budgeting meeting. However, if someone is out there, if your executive is out there talking and they phone you and say, you know what, I had to share this, you have to file something today. That is both an expensive and a cheap patent. It's going to be a cheap patent because you don't have time to make it really great, but it might be expensive because you're going to have to pay urgent fees potentially to whoever's going to file it for you. So that kind of communication among the players of the company really helps make costs more controllable. As you grow as a company, salaries are could be important. You may need to add a staff member to look after your IP. If you may not have one at first, it might be two scientists and their friend from another department who enjoy working together. Um, but it's important to have the people in your team that can sort of put the attention to, for example, IP to make it all work and not miss deadlines, not miss payments, so that your IP is in good shape for that budget, oh, sorry, that investment or that merger or acquisition. Um, you do want to be aware of what prices are going on out there in the world. There's a huge range, well, it's not that huge, but it's somewhat huge between what you might pay at one firm for this a similar service. Now, there's usually some differences, such as one firm has been given free rein and will spend 30 hours on a patent application with their best guys, people, whereas another firm knows you have a budget and is going to do a tidy little application that does just what it needs to in a week. The prices for those two different things are going to be quite different. Um, but finding out what your peers are paying, talking to your vendors about costs. Do not be ashamed. Do not be embarrassed. Money is important. This is good business to find out, hey, how can we control this? We found that the monthly is going up really fast and we hadn't planned on that. Feel comfortable to talk to your service provider about that. Let them help you. Their awareness, they don't see the same things you see. So the awareness that that's an issue for you will help them help you. Asking for estimates first helps them think about it as well. They think, okay, yeah, now I got to think about how much this might cost, and I'm going to get more competitive in my thinking because the client is asking me to. So I came up, I use a budget, like a Microsoft or a Google template to come up with a budget. And I put what I did is I don't know if we can look at this or not. I'm going to try to. Are you seeing the,
No, we would need to share you. We need you to share a different screen, Susan.
okay. I only want to show you this is an ideal world that I've never actually lived in. Like I've always just sat there and scratch. Oh gosh, how much do I think this is going to cost? On go my glasses. This is a nice little template. No guarantees if we do provide it to you because we just used a template and I put some numbers in. Numbers that came from my experience, but they're not your vendor's numbers. Um, so in this particular template, you can add things like IP administration in licenses, which many companies I've worked with have had licenses from a university, in which case there's annual fees. There may be charges with respect to accounting that need to be taken into account in your budget, or finance may cover that, and you may not have to cover it in your IP budget. If there are products being sold, royalty needs to be somewhere taken care of. Usually, royalty would be part of a profit, which would occur in a different place. But if you have to make a minimum royalty payment, you may want to provide for it in your budget. Then typically, I would do things like, okay, I filed a patent. It's at a really late stage. It's already issued. There's a maintenance fee sometime this year, but I don't really know when it is. I'm in a hurry. I might do something like this. And that might look like a lot of money. And yeah, it might be a little bit more than you need, but there are fees when the vendor sends you, hey, you've got a maintenance fee. If the maintenance fee happens to be in the US, there's exchange rate. So in fact, 250 a month for an existing fully mature patent is not unheard of. You could, okay, so here down below I have, if it's already granted, 100 would be enough. But if it's pending, the 250 is a number that you could use that would provide for a modest office action if you received one that year. And in Canada, it's usually the office actions can be expensive to respond to, although it's usually a little less. But you don't necessarily want to have a different variable for each different country. And then PCTs, there's different phases of a PCT application, which yes or no cover uh, a lot of ground. This PCT 2024, I'm contemplating that we've hit the national phase deadline. So I'm just spreading it all through the year that I might be filing in 12 times 36,000. Sounds like a pretty strong national phase filing that includes Europe and the US and Canada and a couple of Asian countries as well, and probably Australia. And patent landscapes, it's good to have a line item for that uh, because oftentimes you'll if you have a new invention, should we file? Should we even think about filing? Should we contemplate a new product in this area? Having one of those quick and dirty patent searches done to find out what's going on out there, someone's got to do it. You could do it yourself. You could get, but usually your time is getting really compressed. You may want to do it outside and FTOs, which are more expensive. So, and then you think about trademarks, other diligence, if that's coming up for you. And if you're using IP insurance, that's another thing that you would want to provide for. Right, I'm going to stop sharing that one. Whoa. Okay. Did I have to? Sorry. I'm not so supposed to be surprised by my own slide deck. Um, so working closely with finance and accounting again goes back to this, hey, keep communicating. Don't let there be silos. It's all going to go a lot better for everybody. Everybody, money is important to everybody. IP is important to everybody, and there should be no silos. Certainly, there should be a go-to person who makes the final call on a like we don't have enough money or we've run out of budget, but we really need to make this filing. That executive who would report to the board could then make that call about, do I need to check with the board or that sort of thing. So your expenditure doesn't exceed the budget, but that you take care of any emergencies appropriately. I have numbers here. There are numbers that have come from experience and what other people have said. I've never filed a national phase entry that has cost $100,000. It's less expensive now than it was in my earlier days because we have cheaper translation costs. However, the Asian markets still remain somewhat expensive because Japan a little more than China because there are language differences. Everything needs to be translated generally. Most of us need it translated. So there's more costs, running costs for all the different office actions and the letters. Um, and so filing a patent application, as you can see, there's a range. I've seen $30,000 estimates from lawyers in some cases. That's they want to give themselves the room to not run out of money. That's a lot of money and a lot of work. 5,000 is awfully low. Um, it really depends on the situation and who you're working with and how you've communicated with them. Some smaller firms or even bigger firms can provide you with a discount for the first application. I've seen that done. They want your business, so negotiate. Understanding that they also have billing targets that they need to make in their firm for the bigger firms anyway. And for the PCT application, which occurs 0 months might be your first application. Generally, you would file either national phase or a PCT application, or even both if you really wanted to or needed to for some particular reason. 7,000 for the PCT, up to 20,000 if there's a lot of revisions. So there's a whole rewrite, and then you're filing a lot of claims, or you're filing a really long application that it might be extra page fees. And national phase, as I've mentioned here, 2,500 is for one country. Both Canada and the US are approximately that for a very simple national phase entry where you're not changing anything. You're just saying, okay, take my PCT and press the conversion button so that it becomes a national phase application. Often you want to make some claim amendments, and those that might cost a couple thousand more, depending on how complex they are. Canada would be 1,000, US might be 2,000. And running costs. Can't forget about those. So should we take some questions to break it up? If I were you guys, I'd be starting to zone out. Any questions?
The only question in the chat I'm seeing is from Patrick, in relation to the PCT. Is 0 months for a provisional?
That would be generally for a provisional, although there's no law that tells you you have to file a provisional at 0 months. You could file a regular utility, which is a little bit more expensive for filing fees and starts the whole timeline of prosecution. You might get an office action even in the first year. Unlikely, but possible. So your 0 months is your priority date or convention date. You can file anything you want there as long as you file something in order to establish your priority date. And then within 12 months under the Paris Convention, you have to file everywhere else in the world that you are going to file. Very often, clients will choose, I'm not really sure where I want to go, but it's more than one country. Then I would suggest the PCT as it buys another 18 months and it will provide you with an initial search that you can use to kind of contemplate how you want to modify your claims before national phase entry, which would then occur at month 30, which is why there's a 30 here.
If we want to stick on this slide for a little bit, we have a couple other questions.
Sure.
You help define national entry.
So I do recommend coming to our IP Pathways course, which we'll talk more about these things, but because we have a nice little timeline, which is really helpful. So when you file a patent application in a country, you have established both a patent application and a national presence in that country. So, say at 0 months, I filed a Canadian application and a US application in the two different countries. That's still my 0 month in terms of the Paris Convention and priority date, but my national phase I've already entered. I can file anywhere else in the world I want at that 12 months. For simplicity reasons, for the maximum patent term reasons, I often suggest file a provisional if you're, especially if you're early days, on your invention. It gives you some time, another 12 months to sort of refine what you're doing. You can refine your application before this 12-month deadline, um, which is really helpful if you're early stage. And because this 12-month filed patent application, whether it be PCT or direct to Canada and direct to US and direct to European region, you're married to that text. You're not going to have uh, the opportunity to add more or change things very much. So that 0 month to 12-month time is nice to have what we call a provisional application or an application that could be uh, dropped in favor of a more refined patent application. And that's why you see the different timelines there. It's you don't have to do it this way, but it's very normal to do it this way.
Great. Next question. I assume this may be a case-by-case situation, but in sweeping terms, apart from applying for a U.S. national patent, phase patent, which other re countries or regions do you recommend on a cost-benefit basis?
So the scientific way to approach this is where am I going to sell? Um, the second list comes from, and I am going to answer the question in the way you want me to, which is tell you the countries, but being scientific about it or logical about it does help because you don't need a patent where you're not going to sell. You don't have a plan in the next 10 years to go into a market. The patent it may not pay for itself. Um, the other place to consider is if you have a major competitor or a major potential buyer where they live, where they work, that would be a place I would target as well. So if I was interested in doing deals with a Swedish company, I would look to Sweden and try to get coverage there as well. Now, saying that, what North Americans typically do, particularly Canadians, is the US is the biggest local market, even bigger than Canada, even bigger than Canada. Um, so quite often I have seen if someone has very little money, they'll only file in the US, or they're just, I'm only interested in the North American market. Canada's such a small market. I'm unlikely to get a lot of competition if they can't go to the US, so I'm just going to block off the US. Next step would be Canada and the US. Next might be Europe, Canada, and the US. Next step might be this is my preference, China. I would say pick China over Japan as your next country. People do like Australia. It's fairly inexpensive, kind of like Canada. They speak English. There's no translation. They have an efficient patent process. However, look at where you're going to sell. If you're not planning to ship that far, or you don't have any competitors there or any manufacturers there, it may not be practical. And every time you file a patent, and you basically are committing to that timeline of all the maintenance, all the prosecution to the end of the 20-year term. So it's something to consider carefully. Um, I often see Japan still chosen. Again, if you are going to be marketing in Japan, it's certainly a good country to have patent coverage in. It's a lot of bigger companies will say, "Yep, you've got to have that." India, a very big country, lots of very well-educated people, growing economy. Um, and it changes every couple of years. We're seeing developments in the world. South American filings are more common. Mexican filings, maybe not today, but Mexican filings have been more of a thing that we've seen from companies that are doing work in North America.
Great. And I think just for the sake of time, last question before we move
Okay.
on. Is there a point at which you can no longer apply for a patent? Is there a point where it's too late?
Yes. Yes. So two timelines. One of them is this filing timeline. So I file a patent application in wherever, and I didn't file anything at this 12-month period. This patent application at 0 months is now prior art. Unless it was a provisional application and it's hidden from sight and I've abandoned it and I'm not, it's gone. It's basically gone. It's gone back into the sea. But if it's a regular application, it will become public. It will be its first filing date will be prior art against anything you do. So that's timeline number one. It's based on your own patent applications and your own IP strategy. The second timeline that gets created is publication. So publication by you, um, or your associate, people close to you, can be forgiven for up to 12 months in certain countries. Canada and the US do have what is called grace periods. Other countries like Japan has as last I checked, a 6 month grace period. Australia, I think, has one now. Europe does not have one. So you're cooked if you have published and then you decided, oh, I really should have filed in Europe. You're not going to have much luck. Um, just because your own disclosure will be prior art to you. Even if for whatever reason it doesn't come up or you didn't know it happened, and this has happened, especially in the case of scientific publications. A scientific publication was submitted and a patent was filed shortly thereafter. And then it turned out that the publication had actually been published before the patent application had filed, unbeknownst to the authors because of early publication of the paper online. That became prior art, which was only discovered very late in the application process. So the national phase had already taken place, tons of money had been spent, and boom, there's this prior art that's right in the middle of your claims, causing you really big problems. So those are the deadlines, your own disclosure, um, and your own filings. By the way, sale is deemed a disclosure. It's there's a sale on sale bar in the US. In Canada, we just have the disclosure bar, but in Canada, case law indicates that sale is considered a disclosure. So pretty much the same.
And just to follow up on that, um, if you are doing a patent against code, um, and that code, like a utility patent, and so there's code and then an output. If
Mhm.
you've shared that output publicly, but not the code, how does that work?
What's the situation? Well, it's again case law defines it as best as it can be defined. And what it is if someone could have recreated the invention based on your disclosure, which was the output, um, that's considered a disclosure.
Okay,
And
that's really
someone has to be a skilled practitioner, yeah, so it couldn't be like a genius, Albert Einstein. I'm taking this as an example, but Albert Einstein did it. Probably you could argue, no, that isn't enough. Most people, most skilled practitioners, developers would not have been able to do that. All right, shall we move forward? So as the boring stuff, the having somebody track these, who's going to do it. If you give it to the executives, as the company gets bigger, they're going to be hard pressed to find the time for that. So have it in mind. Somebody is going to be tracking that. It could be an accountant too. Report monthly. So it's great as companies get bigger and you have the personnel to do this and you have the spend that merits it. Have a kind of a every 15th of the month I would put together, okay, here's the spend this month or the last month, and here's the here's my budget. How does it measure up? So you kind of tracking where you are. That's again, I go back to the relationships, communication, no silos. Being a good communicator is surprisingly important in just about every job there is. So being able to talk to other people and have them, out of their busy schedules, provide you with the information you need to do your job, can be a bit of an art form. And the cost containment discussion with your service providers. As you get bigger, I mean, most of us, if you've got one executive or one entrepreneur sitting in their office, they don't have to be motivated to try to save money and fight for every dime. But as your company gets bigger and there are employees, and some of those employees are not, they don't care if you meet the budget or you're up to the budget, but you could have saved $10,000 if you asked a couple of questions. They're not as motivated to that. So I think it's helpful as you get very big to make sure that that's part of their, it might be part of a KPI that they're doing. KPI is a key performance indicator. I think that's what it's called. It's a measurable thing. So I always used to try to get keeping within the budget as one of my KPIs, which they'd always fight me against because they wanted me to get 10% under. But, then anyway, that was a silly discussion. But motivating that in the employee who is managing it can be really helpful. Creating transparency and shared ownership of costs. It's not the patent administrator's fault if the executive ordered or the operations leader ordered 10 patent applications that were outside of the IP budget. So just be aware that if there is someone responsible who doesn't have authority, who doesn't have the power to make those decisions, the ownership of the budget and the ownership of the responsibility goes with the person at the highest level who's looking after the budget. Um, these are all places I have been in my work. I don't blame me. Review your invoices against estimate quotes, as already said, but it helps. And use your team's insights. Invite your team members to identify gaps and opportunities. This is also something when you're trying to encourage innovation in your company. The last thing you want is everybody sitting around afraid to say anything because you're going to get mad. Um, Ask the questions, listen. Um, you don't have to, as a leader, you don't have to do everything that is suggested, but it's interesting to hear on the ground floor, on the shop floor, what seems obvious to them that you might not be aware of that, well, if they'd spend a lot of money if they did this, for example. And then as you get really big, there's usually an annual review that you're either asked to or you put in place yourself to look at how are things going, how's our budget adherence going, how are our costs running, is there sort of going up 20% a year and with no end in sight. How is our company IP budget compared to industry standards? And there is, surprisingly enough, for mature companies, there is, I can't remember if it's a 10% or 20% or 5%, but there is of your profits, a certain amount is kind of an acceptable IP spend. And so being aware that that's the case and that your IP spend shouldn't be over way up here and your profits are down here, that doesn't make any business sense. Um, Quarterly updates may be important at certain particularly transitional times. If there's a lot of personnel change and you're establishing communication routines. And I think I've said all these other things. Encourage your creative force. And here's a few more tips that I just thought of I think they're important. They might be boring. Um, Here's something that's happened to me a few times. So this used to happen in one direction. So somebody up in the executive had an IP budget and they didn't tell me what it was. And I didn't know. So there was no way that I could adhere to it because I had no idea what it was. That went the other way later because then they asked me to do one and then they never looked at it. So what I'm telling you is you all have to be working from the same sheet. And again goes to the teamwork, collaboration, and communication. Things you can't control, even no matter how much you plan, you're just estimating. You can never know what is going to happen in a given year. You can certainly estimate this is probably what's going to happen based on past experience and my knowledge of what's going on in the future. Uh, be aware that you need to make it needs to make sense. So you need to balance and be somewhat cost contained about IP. You could spend hundreds of thousands. The law firms will be delighted if you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on landscapes and FTOs and finding the white space, filing patents every time that something happened. You want what's needed. You want what's practical and not what's nice. So a good hard look at those things, as I said, suggested at least every year, it's a good idea to do. Outside counsel, tempting to have them look after things. They're so good at it. They come out, one day they'll send you a full and complete report. It is the most expensive IP management option in the long run. And that is why it's nice to have an internal team and track your IP assets internally. Because when you want to know just now, like, wait a minute, how many patents do we have again? Or get a count for either a slide deck, or the board report, you've got somebody you can call and it's not going to cost you anything extra. Also, I've got to say, no one cares more about your IP than the person who's in the same team you are. IP providers are great. We care a lot when we're outside, but you know the people that you see their faces, you care about them keeping their jobs. It's just that the motivation is very high when you're an inside person. And the last thing, well, I got the small entity next, but don't put up off making decisions as it generally will cost you more, particularly in the US, to get extensions, or in other countries too, to get extensions, or worse yet, you don't have time for the service provider to prepare an adequate response. So you get a crappy response because they didn't have time. You're not paying enough attention. They asked you for some help and you didn't put in the time. So soon as you get the email report, put it on your calendar. That's Friday morning is my favorite. That's when I'm going to sit over this and look at it and give it my thought so that I can respond to the service provider and get something going so that there's no last minute decisions. And I'll just mention both Canada and the US have what different entity status and what it means only for patents. Um, there's a lower cost, a half price cost for a lot of the patent fees in Canada for companies that are fewer than 100 employees. And it can be really helpful. So ask your service provider to consider it for you and they will ask you questions like, are you licensing it to a larger company? Because then you would qualify for non-small entity status. If you licensing it to a 10,000 person company, you don't get to be small entity anymore. Um, and there is a link in the slides that will take you to the definition at SIPO. In the US, you can be bigger because everything's bigger in the US. 500, so 500 people. It really, a lot of our companies, our early stage companies, are able to qualify for small entity status. Again, it's a 50% discount. It's a big deal in the US. Um, when you license to a larger company, you have to tell them, and then you go up to large entity status. But until that time, you can save on the fees, and it's a bigger amount in the States. And microentity status exists in the States only. It is for the first, like the inventor who's just starting out. He or she uh, has not filed for patents before, up to four. I guess it's less than four. So four patents, has an income less than, and it's quite a big amount of money. Last I looked, it's over 200,000, and it's probably in US dollars. So that can be something to look at for very early startups to save money for the first couple of filings. How much money is it going to save? Well, honestly, with small entity status, it's 140. Micro entity status is 70. Uh, there's extra paper you got to fill out for micro entity. So honestly, most service providers don't even offer it to you because it doesn't make a huge difference. And that's it. Any further questions from the, I'll stop sharing. I can have a look at them myself.
Does a granted U.S. national phase patent help with getting a national phase patent grant in other countries or regions?
It can, and how that can be used. They have something called the patent prosecution highway in many countries now, and it is basically a lateral agreement that the countries have with each other. Canada and the US have it. It was a trial, it's on a trial basis at first, and it's worked really well. So what happens is so you've got a granted patent in the US, or you've got a good search report or examination report in the PCT. You can do it for that too. You basically uh, provide an office action or a response, sort of not an office action, a response or an application to the patent office you're interested in twinning. Here are these patented claims in the US. Here's how we're making here's the connection between either our current or amended Canadian claims, for example, so that the examiner can look at that and say, oh, well, everything's been taken care of, and these claims are almost identical, and all the art that I was going to pull up has been dealt with here. The examiner has the option to say, sorry, that doesn't satisfy me. I have additional questions. But it does allow for if something is a clean prosecution, it could be a very nice, clean grant with the next response or next office action is a grant. So yes, you can do that. It's US and Canada aren't the only countries. Um, I just can't remember offhand which other ones there are, but it's something to ask your service provider about. PPH is the usual acronym that they will recognize.
Great. Next question is kind of on the iteration of a product. So if an original invention is public, can you still file for patents on new, non-obvious improvements to that invention? And how might that affect the cost?
Uh, so two questions. One of them, yes, you put in the new and non-obvious. Well, if it's new and non-obvious, yeah, you could file a patent application, um, and you could expect to get it if that is true. As far as the cost is concerned, from the patent office's view, there's no change. It's a new invention. They look at it as if they've never seen anything else in the world. They don't know you. Uh, But from your patent attorney's point of view, it may be less expensive to craft the patent application. Number one, They know the art with you already. They have experience in the field. They can reuse some of the parts of the original application. Um, However, saying that if they reuse too much of the original application, the examiner is going to be scratching their head saying, I don't having trouble seeing what the difference is. So you want to make it really easy for the examiner to find those novel and non-obvious components of your new invention or your improvement. So it could be result in a lower cost, Pat, and I hope that was what you were asking, but maybe not necessarily.
Any other questions? Oh, here. Just a follow-up, Victoria said, I've heard of some companies patenting open source to protect the IP as open source. Have you seen this?
No, I haven't. That's interesting. Patenting open source. So I'm assuming that the open source is patented before it's disclosed. And Victoria, if you feel free to just turn on your mic, that we can just because I can't see you and I can see sort of the questions.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I'll just elaborate that no, it would be that the invention has been worked on as an source project, but what some open source projects are finding that there are kind of predatory groups that come in and maybe try and, work on patenting what really isn't their
Oh,
invention. So
yeah.
some source communities are taking the step of patenting it open source. Uh,
Interesting.
yeah. So I just wondered if you'd heard of that and yeah.
I haven't yet. I think it certainly appeals in a sense of, well, how can we defend ourselves? We're trying to do something good here, and bad actors are coming in and trying to block us and our users from using this open source software. Another approach could be, I mean, patenting may be the most effective. You won't get the patent, like it won't be a granted patent, but there will be a patent publication. Another approach could be publishing, which, at least if the system is working, should also prevent someone from being able to patent it. But I'd have to look more into that whole situation. Thanks for suggesting it.
Follow-up to the question regarding the PCT. Are lawyers required for doing the filings on behalf of the company?
So, no. Um, you could, and also, so you say lawyers, there's also patent agents, who are not lawyers. They are just qualified but patent act under the Patent Act by a difficult exam, which the lawyers would also have to take in order to be patent agents as well as lawyers. But I don't think that's what you're asking. You're asking, can the company itself make the filings? And yes, they do. And that's often done, sometimes to the detriment of the patents, the company's IP. But say as one example, there's a group I worked with recently that they would do the internal drafting with their science team and their technical team, and then share that over in its form to the uh, other group that sorry, an outside service provider. And that group was then would then either polish it or they wouldn't even look at it and they would just file it. That gives the assurance that all the paperwork is done appropriately, which can be helpful because it can be a little complex. But other companies have an adept person internally who can sit there and fill out the paperwork and do things, do the software in the right way or the document in the right way, and keep track of the filings. That is okay to do. You have to register to do it. So the person, you can't sort of, hey, it's Friday, I think I'll go ahead and file a patent. You probably have to plan longer than that. You'd have to register, get your credential to file patents, and then you do so, and doing it as the company itself. You're not doing it as Bob for the company. You're doing it as the company name.
Kind of an add-on question to that. If you're a Canadian-based company and you're filing in another country, do you need a representative from that country to do the filing in the corresponding jurisdiction?
Uh, in most cases, I have not experienced a situation where I could, like, I've tried, hey, can I just file this myself? No, I think there's different regulations in all the different jurisdictions. Uh, I certainly, now that I'm older, I certainly wouldn't even try because if I screw something up, that's a really expensive mistake um, for me to have made. So I would say no for patent filing. I do know that if you file a Madrid trademark, a Madrid Protocol trademark as a company, which you can do, um, you can just select the countries that you want and they'll add them to the bill and they'll add them to the shopping cart and you won't have representation necessarily in that country. You'll just get from the trademark office of the country itself, you'll get a little note. Hopefully you understand it, of whatever you need to do. Pay us more money or it looks good, we're going to grant it, whatever. So that's a situation where you don't necessarily have to start with an advocate with you or a representative in the country, but it's helpful if you have someone that you know in the country to say, "Hey, I just got this message. They say I can't understand what it says. What do I need to do? Could you help me?"
Any other questions from the chat? We only have a couple minutes left, but I'll just check again. Okay, great. I think we'll cap it there then. Thank you so much for coming and for all your questions. That was a really engaging and interesting talk. We hope to see you soon. Again, like Susan said, we encourage anyone who hasn't done it yet to apply for IP Pathways. We only have a couple cohorts remaining, so please do check that out if you're interested in learning more about IP. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.